Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Nicholas Richardson and this is the news. The official visit of the Estonian President Kersti Kaljulaid to Poland began with a welcome ceremony with Polish President Andrzej Duda in the courtyard of the presidential palace in Warsaw. This was followed by face-to-face talks between the two leaders and then plenary talks between the Estonian delegation and the Polish government. Later, Kaljulaid met the speakers of the Sejm and the Senate.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for showing this unity as we are together in Warsaw. We talked about the situation in Ukraine, about relations with Russia, on those Russian troop movements that are being watched. It seems that the situation is calming down. It was undoubtedly a show of the efficiency and strength of the Russian army, from which the North Atlantic Alliance should draw conclusions. I also spoke about the difficult situation of Poles in Belarus, about the persecution taking place there, about the arrests of Polish activists who are, after all, Belarusian citizens. Unfortunately, they are being persecuted at the moment. We are looking for various possible solutions. We are looking for various options for their release and for these fundamental human rights to be respected, and to be respected in the future. We emphasize that the international community should demand it strongly, and I do not conceal it.
A very short answer to the question would be that Estonia doesn't need to ratify, but the Parliament will give its approval, hopefully still in May. But to extend a little bit, then I would say that this discussion you are having in Polish society reverberates also through Estonian society. A very short answer to the question would be that Estonia doesn't need to ratify, but the Parliament will give its approval, hopefully still in May. But to extend a little bit, then I would say that this discussion you are having in Polish society reverberates also through Estonian society. A very short answer to the question would be that Estonia doesn't need to ratify, but the Parliament will give its approval, hopefully still in May.
After more than 5 hours of debate on the first reading, the Parliamentary Foreign Affairs and Finance Committees adopted a draft law on the ratification of the decision to increase the amount of the European Union budget. The second reading and voting on the draft law is scheduled for today.
Before the vote on the ratification of the Reconstruction Fund, Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki called for a vote above party division. Today, ladies and gentlemen, members of the House, we are not voting only on the National Reconstruction Programme, as many of you have focused on it today. Today, this act on the European Union's own resources is an act on whether or not to accept EU funds for Polish development, Poland's development for the next decade, and this decision is one of the most important decisions for the next 10 to 20 years. Earlier, the president of Solidarna Polska, Zbigniew Ziobro, upheld his party's position on the ratification of the Reconstruction Fund. We are against the communization of debt, which carries serious risks, and taking responsibility for someone else's debt, which we may have to pay back in the future if one of the states fails to meet its obligations. The left is in favour of adopting the law and, as its deputies emphasise, will not be totally opposed. Thanks to the left, local government officials will have 30% share in the management of these funds. It is thanks to the left wing that over 4 billion zloty will be allocated to co-financed district hospitals. The Civic Coalition called for the voting date to be postponed by 14 days. The meeting was held in the Senate in which, in addition to representatives of the Civic Coalition, Nowoczesna, Lewica, PSL and Poland 2050, local government officials participated. We have set conditions that funds should be spent fairly and that they should reach those most in need. Unfortunately, the version of the National Reconstruction Programme that was sent to Brussels does not match these standards. Deputy Speaker of the Sejm, Professor Richard Terlecki, spoke about the importance of today's vote. We expect that this vote will be successful, that is, that Poland will have a chance to obtain huge funds, that is, 270 billion zloty, which is truly an exceptional situation and an exceptional amount. The ratification of the decision by all member states to increase the EU budget through its own resources is necessary to launch both the multi-annual financial framework for 21 to 2027 and the Reconstruction Fund. Poland will receive a total of 770 billion zloty over this period.
United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken said yesterday in London that the United States is striving to normalise and stabilise relations with Russia, but will react firmly to any manifestation of aggressive behaviour on the part of Moscow. The United States Secretary of State is in London for a meeting of the foreign ministers of the G7 countries.
The meeting in the British capital was attended by, among others, the heads of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of India, South Korea, South Africa and Brunei, which currently heads the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The aim of yesterday's talks was to prepare the ground for the G7 Leaders Summit in Cornwall, which will take place in early June. Blinken held bilateral meetings with the foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan, and the host of the meeting, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab. The main topic of the talks was the normalisation of diplomatic relations with Russia.
The door for positive relations and diplomacy is always open to us, and I think that's something shared across many of the NATO countries.
We are focused very much on Russia's actions and what course it chooses to take. President Biden has been very clear for a long time, including before he was president, that if Russia chooses to act recklessly or aggressively, we'll respond. But we're not looking to escalate.
The US Secretary of State also presented Washington's new strategy towards Beijing.
It is not our purpose to try to contain China or to hold China down. What we are trying to do is to uphold the international rules-based order that our countries have invested so much in over so many decades.
Blinken also referred to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
On North Korea, yes, you're exactly right. We completed the policy review, and we conducted this review very deliberately in two ways. First, with the recognition that this is an incredibly hard problem, and to state the obvious, it is yet to be solved from administration to administration.
During yesterday's meeting, the internal situation in Myanmar was also discussed. British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab stressed that the military junta should end the bloodshed and hand over power to civilians.
We want to see an end to the violence. We want to see the military regime return to democracy and the electoral mandate that the government should have.
The summit of the leaders of the world's largest economies will be held in Carbis Bay in early June. The main topic of this year's G7 meeting will be the recovery of national economies after the COVID-19 pandemic and a discussion on climate change.
At least 23 people have been killed and 65 injured in Mexico City after a subway viaduct partially collapsed as a train was driving over it. Subway carriages fell onto cars driving on the major road below the viaduct.
At around 10:20 p.m. local time, a 20-metre section of viaduct collapsed onto the street in the southern part of Mexico City while a Metro Line 12 train was passing over. Some of the metro cars fell onto cars and a bus driving below the viaduct. The number of victims and injured continues to grow. More than 20 people have died, including several young ones, but we cannot say exactly how many victims there are now. Shortly after the start of the rescue operation, the authorities decided to suspend it due to the high risk of the rest of the viaduct collapsing. The rescue services managed to save one person trapped in a car who was transported to hospital in a serious condition. According to the city authorities, the Mexican prosecutor's office has already started work on determining the cause of the crash. According to the mayor of the city, one of the possible causes was the loosening of a girder. However, she stressed that we should await the results of the expert study. Our main task is to care for people in hospitals and relatives of the victims who, unfortunately, died in this catastrophe. The prosecutor's office has already started an investigation. It will gather all the expert opinions to find the answer to the question, what happened that led to the accident on Metro Line 12? Metro Line 12 was built almost 10 years ago during the tenure of Marcelo Ebrard as mayor of Mexico City. Numerous complaints and irregularities were reported during the construction of the metro line. On 9th of January this year, a fire broke out on a subway siding in the city centre, in which one person was killed and 30 others were poisoned by smoke.
Over the last 24 hours in Poland, over 31,000 coronavirus tests were performed, with fewer than 2,300 coronavirus infections diagnosed. A further 28 people died. That's the news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us for the weather, Poland Daily Business and more programmes. But from me, it's have a good night and a better tomorrow.